green waste from the council back down there. Green waste from Sydney, which we couldn't use because it had so many pieces of steel and nails in it. So we can use anything into the compost. It all comes down to the recipe. Using the right ratios, being chicken at 7:1 and heavy carbons of 200:1. The cake mix at the end has got to be 25:30 to get the effective changes. Once it's all mixed together, with the synchronization process of getting the moisture up, so you're really wanting to moisten the carbon to the level that your nitrogen sources are, so when they start the breakdown they come down evenly. Otherwise, at the end of a compost operation, you'll have what we call separation. And I know I've got plenty of our own composters here today, Simon and Cam and Co and Roy, and what you'll find is you have separate pieces of particles still after 10 weeks. Well, that's really possibly the reason for that usually is because that synchronization stage at the beginning was not done to its ultimate aim. You've still had dry carbon still trying to break down when the fast nitrogen was getting away from it. Owen's operating this system with me now out here, and I've finally found a guy that picks up moisture really well, so well done mate, because it's the toughest thing to find is getting your moisture right. This row here was started on the 27th of September. So that's when we kicked off with this row. And I reckon in the next week they'll be joined together, these two rows. They'll both start on the same day. So it's row 12, and what we do, we have these record sheets that we keep all our records on for every day. And Owen wrote this one in this morning. Where is it? I'll find it here in a second. But it's 100, what is it now? So this one he didn't turn this morning, that one he did. This is now 174. So it's really cranking. And the CO2, I wouldn't, it's Fahrenheit. I'll tell you what the Celsius is. It's 79 degrees Celsius. And I did have a compost operator here. We called him Tractor Trev. And the other guys here one day said, watch this. And just before Smoko, we saw Tractor Trev walking up and down the road fossicking. And I went, my God, what is he doing? Next thing, he pulled out some silver foil. He was heating his pies in the compost row. Needless to say, I had to say to Tractor Trev, really, for an OH&S reason and also possible death, don't do that. So, you know, people do weird things. But they did heat the pies.
Probably had a bit of flavour.
Probably. So that is 18 CO2. So remembering that atmosphere is 21% oxygen. That's now 18% is CO2. So we've only got 3% of oxygen left in that row. That's the reason we turn. Because if we so over 10, you turn. And over 140 degrees, which is, you know, 50 odd degrees Celsius, we turn as well. Because we're wanting to keep this an aerobic process, a microbial process. So parameters there have to be there so that the whole thing keeps working. We don't want to cook it, and we don't want to turn it anaerobic. We cover for the same reasons. So that things still breathe, those covers breathe, so the whole thing stays aerobic. So yeah, that's a really cranking row. And that's got probably, wow, that would have 6 or 7 different feedstocks in that row when we made it. That had horse manure, it had chicken manure, it had pig manure, it had, what else we have? We had lucerne, we had grain. So that's got a massive amount of things in there apart from straw and all other sorts of things. So the diversity is everything. And the more you can put in there, the better. Hugh was talking about the actinomyces. Because this is a fraction, hasn't been turned this morning, have a look at the white friendly fungi on that. It's covered in it. So that's just saying, that's to me, as soon as I walked up to that and I saw the actinomyces, that friendly fungi, that's immediately saying to me that's too dry. So the heat's already taken the moisture from yesterday, it's taking it down. If that wasn't turned today, we'd have a real issue the next day with this.
When was it turned last?
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yep. So this is and this period of time is when you're getting all that maximum cell explosion in here. So like one day we came here and we thought, wow, what's gone wrong with this? It's gone all gluey, and all that is that you suddenly have all that cell division and all your extradates are coming out of everything, and it just turns it seriously gluey. And I see a few composters nodding their heads because they know all about this stuff, because you just suddenly go, wow, what have I done today? But it's not that, it's just now you've got to manipulate your moisture much more carefully to get it to go through that process, and it all just settles down again.
Sorry, was this too dry, would you say?
I reckon this is just on the edge, but yesterday it was perfect.
Okay.
So this is just because this is cranking temperature big time. And probably that's telling me that temperature's rising so dramatically that maybe the recipe in here had a fraction too much nitrogen, because it's really cranking. It's really cranking. Whereas this one, for some reason, hasn't been doing. It wasn't as bad this morning, I'll bet.
No.
No.
So you had other feedstocks for that role?
Oh, they'd be basically the same.
Did you
But
have to test
you know, only needed an extra 2 buckets or something of stuff in the one spot here, and boom, you know, you've just added extra nitrogen.
Do you have to test your feedstocks every time you do one?
We do all our, whenever you get a feedstock into a compost site, you must get it tested, because then you know your carbon to nitrogen ratio, you know what's going on with your feedstocks. Because when you put them in here, you don't want something playing tricks on you and saying, wow, what's gone wrong on the compost row, when all it was that your feedstock was totally different to what the generic feedstock test is. So get every feedstock tested. So what I'm going to ask Owen to do now is fire up the compost turner and run through this row, and we'll just see what's going on. He's going to put probably, what do you reckon, Owen?
Maybe 5, 40, I don't know.
Any other composters here willing to have a guess? I reckon yes. We're talking nozzle size now. I reckon 540s, probably at about 3.5 k's an hour or something like that. So it's good.
Yeah, everywhere across Australia, people are making compost.
Yep.
With covers, without turners, the front end.
Yep.
Maybe just turning them now and again the best they can.
Yep.
Yeah. And then
Sure.
are they getting them to? What are they doing?
They're taking their composting to a level, but there's another level they could take it to, if I could say that. And that's a bit like the clay, why we add clay in here. To get the humification process active in this compost, it has to have some soil in there, some clay content. So you can make a reasonable compost with just doing those sort of things, but it's really, composting's particle management. So you want to be impacting every particle all of the time.
Parts per million or even below 50. Ammonium might be a few hundred, because I reckon the pH is going to end up over 7. But it should be under 1,000, and it's common to see so-called compost where both of those levels are up there much higher.
I get that.
That's going to grow weeds.
Yep. I'm still in the breakdown phase.
Yep.
That hasn't stabilised.
Yeah, and you go to Bunnings and you buy a bag of compost for 10 bucks, and it says with big letters, don't put a mask on before you open, or don't read this thing.
Exactly.
And
It's just not.
at the counter once I opened the bag and it stank like hell. I said, this is not composting.
Oh, yeah.
It's still in the breakdown phase.
In many cases, you can smell it on the pallet at the store.
So if we move over now, just slide.
50s, this regimen of growing the fastest possible meat bird chickens, and it involved lacing the feed with arsenic. So if you're using meat bird chicken manure in your compost, don't rely on that for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years on your paddocks, because you can end up with arsenic poisoning on the paddock. Arsenic takes the place of phosphorus, shuts down all the proper chemistry involved with phosphorus, and then you don't have a very easy paddock.
2% max in there, maximum.
Yeah, and
So
not meat bird chicken.
No, there's layers. Actually, this comes from Langfields out on the Cowra Road, big layer place. But so nitrogen sources, very little amounts. Carbon sources you need more of. So Owen, would you like to fire that up, and we'll fire it through $30 and $80 vary. Yes it is actually. I've got compost here that make it for around $35 because we get everything paid. People pay get to take their waste. Here we have to pay for everything. It's probably costing on average about $80. Yeah. How's it going, Roy? Yeah, it's pretty good.
Making me nervous now if I done the right thing.
We'll have a look at this now. A little fine droplets though, 40 nozzles. Just go slower if you think that. But we'll have a look at this now and see what it's like. Well, I wouldn't. Yeah, that's pretty up in moisture. That's not low at all. No, that's just pure water. If we just come up around this way, so if anyone's got a glove and they'd like to have a dig in there, here is probably about 18. So with the finish going with the 2%. So you can see the remediation that the turn is doing. It's impacting every particle. We're putting on very fine droplets, and that's what should be happening at this time. It's only early days in that composting process. It's really dynamic what's going on there. So it really should be, there should be lots going on too. So what we'll do now is, while Owen's finishing that, we'll walk to a finished row and we'll just have a look, because I want it just really. Now that's finished compost. There's no heat exchange, it's totally ambient temperature. It's completely stable.
Some small balls.
It's got crumb structure in it, and that should be there. That little crumb structure, it should look like crumbs. It shouldn't be a big glutinous mass. That balling, these little balls in it, that came from when we had 2 or 3 inches of rain earlier on when it was being made, and it got very wet at one stage just from rainfall. So we had to remediate that moisture down over time. So that there's still a little bit of balling there, but that comes from high moisture in the compost when we've been finishing it. But that's how it should be. Absolutely stable. And if you look at it, there's very, very little unbroken down material in there. So that's your objective of composting, is to turn it from the raw state to something completely stable that you can go and grow crops with.
So how many weeks would that be?
10 weeks.
That's 10 now.
Will that dry out?
No, you'll dry that much out. And that's the reason you cover. You know, if you're in the summertime, you don't want it drying in 3 or 4 inches. It won't dry any more than that. It'll stay as moist for a year. No, once it's stable like that, as I'm sure Hugh would verify, that'll stay like that for ages. But if it's like that and they're trying to sell it as compost, it will not stay like that. You know? So that's why, you know, that stability, that humidification process is when we rebuild it to a stable form.
And is that a geofabric of some sort?
Yeah, it is. It's like a wick. The fabric's like a wick. It actually draws the moisture out to the edges and drops it off, but it still breathes.
Have you come up with a system to wind this up and off?
I will.